Yo, so this time around we got another thread that I thought would be pretty fun, slightly repurposed, but it's more or less still the same. Who is the most powerful vampire of the people that you see here? By the way, if you haven't already, make sure you guys sign up for the Patreon. You get access to early content and priority on your requests. In this case, we're running the Dead Apostle Gauntlet. Since majority of the people are Dead Apostle, I said why not? And I do want to clarify that this is only a gauntlet between everybody that's on the screen, because I did post this on Twitter, and for whatever reason, people started jumping out the gate saying Zelrech and ORT, when Zelrech and ORT are nowhere near this post. The idea is just the 5 that's been selected, which is pretty interesting to me, because while there is a lot of missing information between the ancestors, the ones that are here, I would say have just enough for us to get through. So on the far left side of the screen, you have Van Fem. Van Fem is one of the oldest Dead Apostle ancestors that we have. His main goal, of course, is achieving the Ellsbury Velesti, and he has decided to do that going against the natural state of mind of a Dead Apostle by using his wealth, by using his influence to dominate and gain favor in the human world. So he's really high up. In the middle, you have Michael Roa, who is one of the major antagonists for Tsukihime and the remake. Pretty much majority of what the story revolves around, with him being able to infinitely reincarnate as long as he has a vessel that he can get into, and there's nobody there like Shiki to stop him. Originally, we know that he was a part of the Dead Apostle ancestors, and they kicked him out due to the format that he wanted to go by of being an apostle. They weren't rocking with it, and he ended up going his own way. He also used to be a part of the church before he became an apostle, and he actually was one of the people that co-founded the Burial Agency, which is one of the greatest factions in the church overall. So he's been around the block, has a lot of knowledge, has been alive for an extremely long time, his soul at least. Even in the picture, as you can see, he has part of his body completely wiped out by Archway, and he's laughing. And up until a point, that situation only got worse. In the top right hand, you have the child of Anashe, or Anashe Jr, as I would like to call it, who is one of the many children of the Dead Apostle ancestor Anashe. Now this one in particular is a caveat, because they aren't an actual Dead Apostle, they're only a bloodsucker, but they are derived from a Dead Apostle. Their actual parent is one, so we're just throwing them in the mix due to that involvement, but they were a part of the original post. It's kind of hard to tell just by looking at it, but this is only the eye of Anashe. Long story short, the original Anashe is actually somebody that turned themselves into a sentient forest. So it's a vampiric forest, and that entire forest will start to attack you if you try to invade it. The thing is, once the forest becomes active, it starts to give birth to smaller forests, and this is one of those smaller forests that pops up in the El Malloy series. So you have Anashe Jr. there playing a role as an antagonist of sorts, and also a conduit for Dr. Heartless to do his summoning. But all in all, the forest will outright attack you with all of the trees that are present in it, or outright find ways to drain you of your blood, whichever one comes first. Just below that, we have Jester, which is a Dead Apostle that shows up in Fate Strange Fate. He is the original master of No Name Assassin. You know, as per the story claims, his original intentions is to awaken ORT, which has had Zelrech's eye in the back, trying to make sure that that doesn't happen in the case that he's able to get that far. As far as ability, he is in fact one of the lower ranks on the Dead Apostle scale. As a matter of fact, considering that he originated in Fate, he wouldn't even have a rank, but knowing his background, knowing that he is a subordinate that has independence, we know that he at least has to be rank 6 if they were going to give him one. We're going to get a little more into that because that's crucial. But as far as everybody that Jester has went against, servants, church members, humans with phantasms alike, the only one that's really been able to contain him is the Horseman of Pestilence. But that's not really saying much, because the Horseman of Pestilence is pretty broken against literally anybody just because they're conceptual. So yeah, go figure. And then last but certainly not least, we have Vlov, a minor antagonist in the new Tsukihime. He's the one that replaces Nero in the story. Been over him a couple of times on the channel already. I've mentioned him in the Dead Apostle Hierarchy video. He's the literal cover. I will say he's easily one of the strongest vampires with the most feats that are actually applicable and not hearsay. And the crazy part about Vlov is he's actually supposed to be on the weaker end of the spectrum from multiple sources. So even as a quote-unquote weak Dead Apostle ancestor, he still ended up being extremely powerful, and it took an ability that would be in the realm of true magic just to kill him. A lot like Roa. And I'll just start off with the top comment because I do think that they hit the nail on the head with majority of them, and these are subject to change as we go through them. I'm gonna say Anashe Jr, one of the children of Anashe, would be the weakest, and I'm gonna get into why. For the comment, the only time Anashe's children have appeared was in El Malloy, and thus it is very difficult to scale them, both because El Malloy is obviously a fate world and thus vampires in general are way weaker, but also because they didn't really fight anyone all that strong. In fact, their presence was mostly for horror value. And this is my thing, right? So when Anashe Jr. shows up, people that are present is Waver, Gray, who is one of his students, Yvette, who is one of his students, Melvin, who is literally a tuner. In other words, he's just support. He casts support spells. And Karabo, who is one of the members of the Holy Church. Originally, these were the only people that were present, and they were still able to deal with Anashe Jr. And the thing about the children of Anashe is that this forest in particular isn't the only child. When the parent, the original Anashe, sows their seeds into the world, multiple forests spring up in different locations. They're lucky that they just ran into one. But nonetheless, all the people that I mentioned, it was just enough to get the job done. We know Gray was there, who is a descendant of Artoria, with her mystic code and her Rongo. Melvin, like I said, was just support. Waver is a third-rate magus at best. He's just the brains of the operation, so he's just giving orders. Yvette does have her own set of mystic eyes, and this did help weave away from some of the attacks that the forest tried to make on them. And then Karabo is a skilled member of the church. He does have his own set of mystic eyes and his prior knowledge of facing odd things of this nature. Yet everybody was able to walk away sound. It's not that big of a team. They're not that powerful. I would say the most powerful person here is Gray with her Rongo. The whole idea about the forest is your ability to survive until the power winds down and it disappears. It's just having the ability to do so. There are some mages that did try to go into the forest and take it down. It did not work. They got clapped. So when you're going against Anashe, I will admit it's more so of a survival thing more than anything, unless you have something that can clear an entire forest decisively, which, let's be honest, most people don't have. And even if they did, they wouldn't want to use that just walking into it with no knowledge. So I would say, given the mages that it was able to topple so easily, it's absolutely a threat. Dr. Heartless wouldn't have used it if it wasn't, but at the same time, it's not Anashe itself. And so with it being a child of that forest, it can only go so far in terms of power and longevity. It's basically just Anashe watered down. More so feels like an obstruction than anything. Kind of like it was mentioned in the comment. For the average mage, you'd get ran through. For somebody formidable, it would just be just like this situation here, them surviving long enough to cut away and get to safety. Next up, I want to go Jester. The comment says, Jester is a freaking clown that quite frankly has no place anywhere near the others on that list. Not only was he already a weak and low ranked vampire to begin with, he was also abandoned by his parent, which made him even weaker. Sure, he is very hard to kill, but that's true for literally all vampires. Great point. That's not what I really want to refute, because as far as the position that Jester plays in Strange Fate, fake, a lot of it is just him going against people that never would have necessarily beat him anyway, like when he went against Clan Calatin. All of these officers with these pseudo phantasms from Alexandre Dumas, they got ran through. They're shooting him, they're slicing him, they're literally blowing his body into pieces. Couldn't do anything with him. When he went against Hansa, formidable member of the church, just like Karabo, but he's still categorized at a lower scale. This man was fighting against Jester, going up skyscrapers. Jester's throwing cars at this man, and Jester is tanking hits. He's tanking bullets. He's making tornadoes at will. He's being compared to Gilgamesh. He's making everything of that scale seem insignificant. So one thing about that comment I do want to say that's kind of disingenuous is that they frame it in a way to make it seem like Jester hasn't done anything at all, which is a lot. But the main thing that I agree with them on, and this gets into the main root of the problem, is that Jester hasn't necessarily met his match, and for the most part he's been playing around for a lot of strange fate, that stemming from his ability to survive so much and accumulate this knowledge, that stemming from his obsession with No Name Assassin and seeing how things can turn out for her if he's able to break her given the right circumstances. The big issue with his character comes in terms of scaling is that he's kind of in a weird place right now, especially considering that Strange Fate isn't finished, so we don't know where his character is going to go. But as of right now in the story, in the latter half of the volumes, we come to find out that Jester not only was originally a female, Dorothea, but he also was a subordinate to Van Fem, who is also on the list right here, or at least that was the case. Jester was a child of Van Fem. He's the one that turned Jester into a dead apostle. They used to see eye to eye up until the point where Jester decided to have his own way, and he straight up cut Jester off, which in turn would make him a lot weaker than he'd normally be. This is a very devastating thing for Jester because, well, bad timing. Everything that's going down in Strange Fate at this point, motherfucker, you need to put your money where your mouth is. This is the last point in the story where anybody needs to be losing power. I'm gonna just be straight up with you. In other words, Van Fem basically pulled Jester's whole card, where he is now in a position that if he can't do it on his own without the help of Van Fem's power, and by the way, when you're a child of another dead apostle, that's where majority of your power is coming from. So he has been severely weakened, supposedly. Now Jester really has to show up for himself because he has no help. Originally, Jester flaunted the idea that he had so much magical energy reserves that No Name Assassin could use all of her phantasms and it wouldn't matter to him. Just to give an example. And by the way, if you missed the Every Hassan video, No Name Assassin has access to her own version of every single Zabanya that there is, which results in 19 phantasms. So he told her she can use 19 phantasms, wouldn't matter. Now he's in a situation where things aren't looking so sweet. So we don't really know about him for sure. That's why I don't like the way that that was framed, but I will agree to say that he's on the lower end of the scale in terms of people that he has went up against. Right now we're on the 9th novel going into the 10th. He's really got to show up in the 10th. He's still alive. We know of his abilities. He has the ability to shapeshift at least 6 different variations to be exact. One of them has been killed off. But again, like the guy said, none of that really matters if all he's doing is surviving. We've seen him tank colossal giants from the Horsemen of Pestilence. We've seen him tank phantasms from No Name Assassin herself while literally being supported by him at the same time just to troll her. When he ran through Clan Calatin, they are only human, so you can't really rate that as heavy, especially when they're not proficient at magecraft. It's really hard to say too much of anything until we see him getting busy on an offensive level later on in the story. But I'm gonna be honest, it appears that he's running out of time. With him being a subordinate of Van Fem, that kind of speaks to how strong he is already, because Van Fem is literally one of the strongest apostles that we have, period. I just want to get that out the way now. And if his power power is stemming from one of the strongest Dead Apostle ancestors we have, then by extension, he's no weakling. Next up, it gets harder and harder, especially with me being a man of feats. It's hard to juggle between Roa and Vlov. What is the determining factor to make them stronger overall? Because I can name a list of different reasons for both. I don't like the Roa slander that's going on. Let me just get into the comment first. Roa isn't actually all that strong. He is extremely good at magecraft and is extremely annoying to deal with, sure, but he can't even compare to most rank 6 vampires in terms of strength and combat ability, and so on. If it helps you to imagine it better, he is basically a caster class servant compared to other vampires of comparable rank. Sure, given enough time to prepare, he might be hard to deal with, but he is otherwise weaker than them. See man, as somebody that's been through the original, the remake, the manga, I'm looking at it like, man, which Roa? Which Roa are you talking about? You can't be talking about any of those Roa. You talking about the same Roa that reincarnated nearly 20 times and took mystic eyes of death for him to die? Just like Vlov. And see, here's the thing, you didn't need mystic eyes of death to kill Vlov. Shiki just happened to have them at his disposal, and that's what he ended up going down to. You literally need something of mystic eyes of death level to take out Roa. I don't like that explanation of Roa at all. As a matter of fact, it sounds like he doesn't like Roa, period. It's like you went out of your way to completely ignore anything that he's actually capable of. This man can literally teleport by manipulating his lightning depending on which Roa you're talking about. He also has his own set of mystic eyes that can pillage life. Let's not forget, Arkaway, literal true ancestor, put him into a Marvel phantasm and juiced him, and he ate it. Brought himself back to life from nothing. Had half of his body torn off. Ate it. Just in case you're unaware, Vlov is not surviving that. As strong as he is up front, because we do know that all Dead Apostles have that limited immortality through the Curse of Restoration. But look at what we have for Vlov. Vlov is very strong, way stronger than Roa. He can freeze entire cities, casually destroy 3,000 tons of debris, fights both Tsiah and Shiki at the same time while missing an arm, and so on. But he is still much weaker than the usual rank 8 vampires, as stated by Arkaway. Compared to actual Dead Apostle ancestors, he is extremely weak. And that's my thing. He can freeze entire cities. He's getting jumped. Roa was getting jumped too, by the way. Let's not forget that. And Arkaway was way stronger than she was at the point that she fought Roa than she was when she fought against Vlov. Let's not leave that out. But yeah, Vlov can freeze entire cities immediately to the point of absolute zero. So anybody that can't withstand this temperature is just flat out going to die. He has his Shadow Lance. He has his ice projectiles that literally come out at rapid speed as if it were a Gate of Babylon of sorts. He's got his flaming hands, which go up to literally 3,000 degrees, as stated by Arkaway. He will literally smoke you. And to top all that off, he also has his subordinates. So that's any dead that decide to come in the vicinity or out of the ground, because he can summon them, and anybody that's incapable of dealing with that will pose as a distraction too. But here's the thing, he still got bopped. He did all that and still got bopped the same way that Roa got bopped, for the same reason. And Roa has shown an extended level of survivability that Vlov hasn't. But I don't want to discredit what's being said here, because let's be honest, Shiki might come off as, you know, I'm weak, I don't know what's going on. But once Shiki is in a fight, he's like a completely different person. It's almost hard to say he's at a disadvantage because the dude is getting busy. Remember, he's still a psychic at heart, and once the Narnia comes out, it's over with. But we got to give clarity to the fact that they're facing a lot of the same things. Yeah, he can freeze whole cities. That's cool. I loved all of that. I loved the entire fight both times. But that has very little to do with somebody that's actually formidable if it doesn't work. And we have no idea if it's going to work because it all depends on who he's going against. It should have worked against Shiki, but it didn't. And he's still fighting him and his subordinates and slicing through the projectiles and surviving to tell the tale. Sounds crazy to think about, but that's what actually happened. I think people often get absorbed by these spectacles of these characters doing these really huge things, and in doing so, they end up missing what's right in front of them. You know, you're missing the forest for the trees. Due to the outline of Roa's character, they forget how smart he actually is. The whole point of Roa's character in Tsukihime can literally be summed up to he's bored and horny. So with all these reincarnations, he's made a game out of Arkaway coming back to see him over and over again. He's not even taking this serious. Now imagine if he did. Roa is the same person that taught Nero how to manage his chaos and make him the threat that he is today. And that same technique is what Dr. Arak taught Vlov to manage his ideal blood, which we know Vlov already can't handle as is. If it wasn't for Roa, if it wasn't for that technique, Vlov wouldn't even be able to go as hard as he does, because the principle is essentially killing him. But with the technique, he can in part at least ward it off. So he should be thanking Roa for being able to use the best of his abilities, if anything. Then we know from iterations like Type Lumina that Roa and Vlov have fought against each other multiple times, and the only time that Vlov was able to beat Roa was in Lumina. But here's the thing, that's something required when you're going through the story. Being player one, that's just the nature of the way that a game works. Being player one, you have to win. So it's hard to even call that organic, but you can at least give credit for that to both sides. He knows how Roa gets down. And even in Lumina, when they run into each other, he looks frantic when going against him. This is the same face that Gil made when he thought Heracles was going to murk him in UB-Dub. We just gotta lay out all the facts. And then you have the manga version of Roa, if you want to use that one that's overtly told us that he is in fact part Cap Shiki and Roa at the same time, so he's technically still Roa. And in that variation, teleportation, mystic eyes similar to Tono. He can manipulate his blood with his Cap Shiki side. He can make clones. This man knows spells from the Age of Gods that if he was able to recover, you'd be finished. You would have did better saying that Roa got murked by Edmond Dantes in his form as Tarantella. But even though that's true, one thing that people don't bring up is even Tarantella still isn't Roa's best. So even the Roa that Edmond beat was still nerfed. And we know Edmond is a top servant, so that's not something to slight at regardless. Edmond can literally transcend time and space itself. These are the type of people that you have to get for Roa. Sounds more like a compliment to me. So at the very least, I gotta say that him and Roa are tied for different reasons. Admittedly, Vlov has a lot more things at his disposal, and depending on what form of Roa you're talking about, so does he. So in any situation, that will be just as devastating to run into. Ultimately, they both got jumped. They both had mystic eyes of death used against them. Not everybody is going to have that. Not everybody is going to have an equivalent of that level. They are running through a lot of people. Most people. Even Ark had to point out Vlov's combat ability, his expert swordsmanship when they were fighting, and how much of a pushback he gave her even if she was weakened. Ark is still extremely strong. Her at base is better than most people at their best, so it still speaks to a lot. And then we have Van Fem, the Great Van. As I mentioned already, this is the same guy that runs Fem's Casa, the casino. He's the one that hosted the gambling event that Cheryl went to before he was kidnapped. You know, I had a video covering that. The main thing to understand about Van, I mentioned how he's one of the oldest Dead Apostle ancestors. He holds the Elder title, which is a very unique claim to him being one of the first people on the list. He is in fact over 4,000 years old. He's at least 4 millenniums. He's been around since the Age of Gods level old. So all of this should tell you right off the bat why he clears everybody here. And that's part of the reason why he plays the role that he does in the story, because why would he consider most of these people as a threat? We already know that Jester was one of his children from the El Malloy series, and even in his background, we know that he has 7 golem daughters that are all of his own creation that fights in his stead because he's not even bothered to do so, most of which we haven't even met yet. Originally, these golems golems are in fact a lot like Anashe, where they're not actually humanoid. They are originally castles. They're demonic castles, so they're territories that have dominance over the area of anybody that gets involved, and they just take on humanoid form to fight and do his bidding. He's extremely intelligent. I mean, his role alone should say as much, considering that out of all the dead apostles, he is the main one that prioritizes his interests on taking over the world without the involvement of hands. Bare minimum, it's said that you would need someone from the burial agency to even consider going against him, which is one of the highest leagues in the church. You can only put him at the top, quite literally. The ability to turn invisible, so on and so forth. Without going directly into the feats, because I wish there were more from him, he's a status that gets closer and closer to the realm of Arkaway, if that makes sense. And we already know full power Ark, everybody here pales in comparison to her. Just to give you an idea, he's one of the highest ranks you can get. If I didn't put him at the top, because normally I wouldn't because of the lack of feats, he would just have to remain unranked, because we all know that's where he would be. For the comment, Van Fem, on the other hand, is a fully fledged Dead Apostle Ancestor, a rank 9 vampire, and one of the oldest ones at that. This fact alone puts him way above anyone else on the list by default. If you're looking for actual feats though, we don't have that much yet, especially from his much stronger version in the Tsukihime world. And speaking to that, most of what we learn from Van Fem is from between Strange Fake and El Malloy. We actually learned the least from Tsukihime itself, which is where he's originally from. Ironically, the story itself, the French incident, and Prelude, which is a part of the story that comes after Tsukihime, pretty much the build up for Tsukihime 2. One thing that we do have to point out is this fight against Zagreus and El Malloy, which is Zeus's son. We do have Van step out and go against him using one of his daughters, so he pretty much handicapped himself, and he's still winning the fight. Anybody that's the son of Zeus, you already know they're not weak. It's Zeus. Even without as much context as the others, he has a lot more going for him than against him. We know that he's taken a life off of Prelati, who we already know is an extremely skilled magician, that she went back and forth with Toko. Though Toko had the upper hand, the fact that she was able to take a life off of Toko in the first place, you can get a gist of what's in that realm. He's going against people with greater magecraft that's immortal. One thing that we do gotta give heed to is his ranking. With him having one of the highest ranks on the list, he can make subordinates of anybody that falls under him, meaning that everybody that's 8 or lower, and we still don't know all the people he turned into his children. It's very likely they're at least Vlov level, even better than Vlov really, because as we brought up, Vlov is supposed to be weak for his rank, so they would be worse. Rest assured they're gonna come to the aid of their master. In the worst case scenario, you're very likely to get jumped between him, his golems, and his best children. That's potentially at least 9 people at the same time, one of them being one of the strongest in the verse. Good luck with that one. It's going to be a horror story, unless you can handle all of that.